So today, my plan is to talk about the ego, the egoic mind, and how to work with the ego such that it's a healthy ego. You know how it's a skillful ego. Um, I like to make a distinction. So a lot of people have different understandings of the egoic mind, right? And so I'll just tell you what my understanding is, or my how I frame it. And however I frame it is not necessarily the right way to frame things, or the only, certainly is not the only way. But it's helpful to understand from my Buddhist perspective where I'm coming from, right? So, in preparation for this talk, my ego wanted to really start studying about the ego and thinking about, oh, what is it going to say? Right? What should I say for the ego? And I noticed my ego really wanting to plan this talk. And I said, nope, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna let the ego plan this talk. Right. Um, but the way I frame the egoic mind, it's the human mind, right? It's the mind that we need to be able to navigate life. The human mind makes plans, it organizes information, it learns new things, it helps us, all of these automatic patterns. We don't have to think about brushing our teeth, we just do it. It recognizes people and things and helps us navigate being a human being in a human life. And it's really needed for this human life. I talk a lot about the big mind too, the spacious mind or the ultimate mind. So we have this human egoic mind, and then we have the ultimate big spacious mind. There are a lot of different spiritual traditions that demonize the egoic mind and make it bad and wrong, and glorify the ultimate spacious mind. And that is the goal that we want to move towards. We want to stop it, egoic mind, behave. You need to behave because I want to be in the ultimate realm. This is where we need to be. This is our true nature, right? And I think that's a total misunderstanding. And the more we do our practice, the more we realize this is a total misunderstanding. We're both, right? We're spiritual beings having a human experience. We have a human egoic mind to help us navigate this human experience. And we have the ultimate nature, this big, spacious, interconnected, where we're all one, all co-creating reality together in this really weird experience called life. you know um, so I don't like to demonize the human egoic mind. I don't think it's a problem. It's designed to help us survive, right? And if we have a healthy ego is actually the doorway to our spacious ultimate nature mind. The healthier sense of a human egoic mind that's not clinging to anything, right? So when we can be with our experience mindfully, fully presently, with whatever's arriving in this moment, even if it's jealousy or fear or pain or love, if I can be completely with my experience mindfully, accept it as it is, not clinging, not pushing away, the spaciousness arises, and I drop into also experiencing my ultimate nature, this spacious, interconnected nature. The doorway to this nature is the egoic mind. I don't want to get rid of it. It is the other side to the same whole. They work together. They're a team, they're a pair. They're both needed to have this experience, right? But what is an unhealthy ego? If I have an unhealthy ego, I get lost in survival. I get lost in fight, flight, or freeze, amygdala responses. If I've had a lot of trauma, I get stuck there in my pain and in my trauma that's unhealed. And then I start churning, and I get in these ego habit patterns, right? Survival patterns that are created. Maybe they were great and helped me survive when I was 6 years old, or 10 years old, or 14 years old. But now those egoic patterns, those mind habit patterns, have me stuck in these really negative loops. And they stop me from experiencing my true nature, right? And life becomes a struggle. And there's a lot of suffering being stuck in these same loops over and over again. A lot of the Buddhist teachers consider that the egoic mind, the one that's stuck in survival, that's stuck in fear, the fear based mind. Um, I just consider that an unhealthy egoic mind. So in the 1970s, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, he was a Tibetan Lama, he started using the term ego to describe this neurotic process of ignorance of what's happening right now. So he was saying that anytime that we see our sense as solid, we see our sense of self. We create this sense of self as a solid, separate sense of self, that this is a state of ignorance. And it's this ignorance that causes us our suffering. And then we have this projection of this separate sense of self. And this is the one that's suffering, right? This is the one, the unhealthy sense of self. Um, the unhealthy ego. The unhealthy ego has what's really interesting is our true nature is groundless, right? We have this egoic mind that helps us navigate life. Then we have the ultimate nature. Our ultimate nature is groundless. And so is the human egoic mind. There is no solid sense of self. It's a groundlessness. There is no unchanging personality. And when we have an unhealthy ego, there's fear, right? There's so much fear. This fear-based, um, like, oh, there has to be something that I can cling to, because if I don't have a connection to my ultimate self, and I feel all alone and scared because I don't have a healthy sense of self, then I start to create this sense of self. And then I have to protect this sense of self. And then I develop all these identities. I'm really good at this, and I'm really bad at that. And I like this, but I don't like that. And I want to be around these kind of people. I don't want to be around these people. Um, we limit ourselves. We put ourselves in all these boxes of who we think that we are or who we need to be, because we are desperately trying to create a ground, a sense of security, because we can't handle the truth of our groundlessness, right? Because we have never um, developed that healthy sense of self. Yeah. So, an unhealthy sense of self, unhealthy ego, and the human egoic mind is either doing one of two things, usually. It's either inflated or deflated, right? And it's constantly comparing ourselves to everyone else to look to see where do we stand in the hierarchy of the power dynamics and things that are happening in this room right now. And we're constantly looking to see who's in charge or who has the power here. How can I gain more power? Or how can I blend in to get along with everyone else? Or how can I go underneath and skirt and hope that nobody notices me? Right. So this inflated mind is a greater sense of self, which is greater than who we actually are. Right. It's not necessarily based in reality. It's looking to feel better than and greater than everyone else. And it's not grounded in reality, because no being is greater than another. We we're interbeing. We're all interdependent. We're all interconnected, right? There's not one part of us that's pulling on all the other parts greater than any of the other parts of the whole. But when we're lost and we're disconnected from our ultimate sense of self, we have to try to build up this sense of self. And so we aggrandize ourselves and think, okay, I have to be better. I have to show up so that everybody will like me and think I'm important, to know how important I am. I'm going to name drop all the famous people that I know, or all the um, special things that I've done, so people know how important I am. That's inflated mind, trying to look good, be right, be in control, those kind of egoic agendas, right? Then there's the deflated mind. Can you feel that? Deflated mind. And that's the one where we compare ourselves to others and we feel less than, because they've done more, they know more famous people than we have. They've had more success in certain areas. They're smarter at numbers than we are, right? Or whatever it is. And this is part of our mind habit pattern, constantly looking to see where we stand in in line with each other. And it's also a habit pattern to either inflate ourselves or deflate ourselves. Sometimes we all do a little of both, and when we're stuck in the egoic mind, but people tend to have tendencies of doing one over the other, right? And because we're disconnected from our whole, from each other, from our ultimate nature, we create all these crazy habit patterns. um, survival survival habit patterns, right? And we can talk about what some of your survival patterns were. In my family that I grew up in, they were highly intellectual people, and their survival pattern was, we will be the best in a university and everything we ever do, and we'll know more than everyone else. It was really intense, right? My father had this thing that we had to be number one, and everything we do, number one. Were you number one? Like, no, I wasn't. So if I wasn't number one, I wasn't worthy of living, right? Or I had to be number one. And if I was number one, I had to come run and say I was number one. But, you know, uh, my siblings all decided to play into this whole having to be number one egoic survival mechanism. That was just one of many that our family that I was taught. But I chose to opt out. I was like, hey, I'm not playing number one. I'll just do the best I can, and to heck with the rest of you. Right? Um, why I was able to, or had the wisdom to do that, I don't know, but I did. Um, yeah. And then if you're a female, there's all of these things that we're taught through the conditioned mind realm. We're supposed to be beautiful or sweet or kind or nurturing or soft. God help you if you're a female with a personality or with an opinion. It's getting better now that I'm getting older, but back then we weren't supposed to have opinions. And then if you were a man, God help you, you were caught in this, supposed to be powerful, almighty, all knowing, all supporting. Um, the things that our conditioned world has put on us that separates us even further from ourselves is been really unkind. And all of these conditioned patterns that separate us from ourselves cause suffering, they cause us stress, and they're usually undercurrent of a lot of judgment and unkindness, right? There's a lot of um, self beat up, and it's all unconscious. It's totally unconscious. So then we come to this practice called mindfulness or Buddhist practice, and we're saying, okay, bring your awareness to whatever's arising each moment. and you hear this judging mind who's beating you up, or you're not good enough, or who wants to plan the next 10 vacations, or all this craziness, all these habit patterns start to show up in our on the screen of awareness, and we're like, whoa, what is all of this? And we see how mistaken this view of the self is, and how much energy goes to trying to strengthen the sense of self, or defend the sense of self, or pleasure the sense of self, or win at the game of life, as if there's some winning that can happen. Right, acquire as much as we can. And at some point we start to see that these strategies are not working. Right, anybody, can I get a hallelujah on that one? I used to say halabuddha. Can I get a halabuddha? Yeah, these strategies don't work. This controlling ego, uh, that's putting ourselves as higher or lower than, is very painful. So, part of our practice is to see how the mind is lost in these patterns, bring some mindful awareness to these patterns, but also bring a tremendous amount of kindness and compassion to these patterns. Um, we have to. We can't force these patterns out of us. We can't control these patterns out of us. We can't say, "Oh, I see you now, so get the hell out. You're gone. Finish." If it were that easy, wouldn't that be great? No, it takes persistence. It takes patience. It takes mindfulness, and it takes a lot of kindness to see these habit patterns clearly when they arise, to hold them with kindness as they're moving through us. The Buddha talked a lot about the tangles of the human mind. He talked about the entanglement of human suffering. So he spoke often in terms of tangles, rope tangles, string tangles, jungle tangles, um, barb tangles to get stuck in, barb plants. And the ego, unhealthy egoic mind, I like to see it as, a string that gets all tangled up, all these misunderstandings, and we keep strengthening all these unhealthy habit patterns, and we just keep getting more and more and more tangled up, right? All the strings get tangled. And our practice is about bringing our loving kind awareness to what's happening. And every time we see ourselves caught in a tangle, we're naturally untangling. Naturally, it's one more piece becomes entangled. But for most of us who've been trying to hyper control our entire lives out of fear, or avoid life out of fear, these tangles are pretty big and pretty embedded, depending on which tangle you're working with. These all these ego identifications and habit survival patterns. So it takes a while. Um, John Donahue said the ego is the false self born out of fear and defensiveness. Huh, right? Yeah, we're just not aware that we're caught in these tangles. And so what do? We try to hyper control other people in our world instead of facing our own tangles. Mm. I have a great amount of compassion for ourselves as human beings, right? And typically, when we first start our practice, we see that we're suffering at the beginning of our practice, and then we beat ourselves up for suffering, and then we judge ourselves for beating ourselves up, and then we judge ourselves for judging ourselves for beating ourselves up for suffering. Do you see the more tangles we weave? And A lot of people will quit meditating because they can't handle it. It's too painful. That's why kindness and compassion is such an important part. Oh, this is so painful. May I be free from this pain and suffering. May I be kind to myself when I find these tangles. May I understand that this is the human condition. I'm not alone. If you're speaking to just any other human being who's not being totally delusional, caught in their own uh, egoic machinations that they have solidified, anyone on the spiritual path who's being vulnerable and honest and real and seeing things clearly is having a similar experience, right? We are not alone. We're having a pretty collective, painful experience. And we're having a, the human race has had a collective, painful experience. It seems like for thousands and thousands of years, maybe since the beginning of time, right? Here, this fellow Siddhartha Gautama, 2,500 years ago, woke up, saw the all of his patterns clearly, broke free from them. Then he started teaching people how to do this practice to break free from their own tangles, to disentangle themselves. But this practice takes a lot of courage, right? It takes a willingness to be human, Ah, to be really imperfect, and to have compassion for each other too, for each other's entanglement. Um, yeah. So there's a lot to this. Um, we can become so compassionate and so patient with ourselves that we become the spiritual doormat. That's not healthy either. So we're looking for balanced perspective with the ego. um, we're also looking to not use the ego to try, e- how can I say this? It's so easy to demonize the egoic mind and see the ultimate mind as superior to the egoic mind, right? um, I've seen myself meditating and being like, yeah, be fully present with this next few breaths so that you can experience spaciousness, so that you can experience quiet mind because it's very quiet in spaciousness. So there can be this subtle craving that arises, wanting one experience over another. And, that's part of our practice. That's the egoic mind having preferences, wanting not to feel its pain and suffering, not wanting to disentangle right now. Hmm. And by the way, if you haven't noticed, you're not in control of the disentanglement process, are you? Right? A new wave arises when it's ready to be disentangled. Causes and conditions come together. We don't put it on our calendar. I want to deal with tremendous jealousy and fear tomorrow. I'm going to deal, oh, next Friday, I'm going to have comparing mind beat me the hell up. Right? No, we don't plan this stuff. It happens. These layers arise when they're ready to be seen, when they're ready to be felt, when they're ready to be heard. And our practice is to be flexible, to be like, I don't know what's going to happen today. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But okay, this is what's arising now for me to feel. This is what's arising now for me to deal with. And then we can use the egoic mind to heal the egoic mind, right? Oh, we can train the egoic mind to go to the pain, to go to the tangle, to be compassionate with ourselves. Who's doing that? We need an egoic mind to do all that, right? We need to see the egoic mind when it's beating ourselves up. We need to enroll the egoic mind into practicing compassion over judgment. compassion over judgment, right? So we're retraining the egoic mind. And eventually it starts to calm down. It starts to become a teammate instead of, um, you know, it starts to realize it's not about survival, it's about thriving. And thriving is to stop the war of inflation and deflation, and actually experience true connection with ourselves. So there's no space between experience, there's no gap. We're not um, dividing different parts of ourselves, fighting with different parts of ourselves. That's another whole talk. Yeah. So the egoic mind can be our best friend, actually, and it can be our teammate. But mindfulness is the balancing factor that lets us know when we've gone into unhealthy egoic mind. Oh, okay. Then we let then we remind the egoic mind, oh, actually, we're practicing self compassion, we're practicing wise response, right? We're practicing waiting and sitting in the gap, just waiting for wisdom to arise, or whatever it is that. Um, um, so and noticing when the ego is in control, the fear-based ego. The ego relies on the familiar. It's reluctant to experience the unknown, right? Yeah, which is the very essence of life, because we don't know what's going to arise each day. Um, so we're enrolling the ego into being okay with not knowing, to being okay with being flexible and open to whatever is going to arise each moment. And we do that by choosing consciously to keep, okay, maybe open to this now, right? And then if fear arises really strongly, then what do? We work with fear. Fear becomes our practice. Oh, fear is right here in my throat right now. It's in my chest. It's pounding and beating and contracting. And as I sit with fear with kindness and compassion, it drops away, it lessens enough, right? That's our practice. Keep being with whatever arises. And then we start to experience our true nature. But we have to use mindfulness to see the pain that the ego self deceptions are causing, and how these strategies are actually not working. This When I first started practicing, I saw the egoic mind's obsession with myself. It was constantly planning, and it was obsessed with building up or strengthening the sense of self. I was like, whoa. So expect that. We haven't been taught anything else. This is we're learning a new way of being. So we want to be patient and kind to ourselves. And then the more you tap into your true sense of self, eventually you start to experience both at the same time. The egoic mind can be present, and it calms down, by the way, it quiets down considerably. And it gets tamed, which is what the Buddha used to say, the tamed mind. It does. Through this daily moment to moment practice and formal practice, the egoic mind becomes tamed, it calms down, it chills out. And from that place, we can experience both uh, who we are, ah, the egoic mind and our ultimate nature, spacious, big mind. Um, yeah, and sometimes you're not going to know that. Sometimes you're not going to feel that. And sometimes it's going to be like, oh, yeah, Rania said blah, blah, blah. But, the Buddha said, there's one of his quotes that said, at the end of this path is freedom. Until then, patience. Patience. Patience is an important part of me. quality that we practice during this path, patience and especially kindness with ourselves. So thank you for your listening, for your attention. In a moment, we'll get into our discussion. I would love to hear some of your mind habit patterns you've uncovered, how you've worked with them, how you've maybe befriended your egoic mind or not, or how you work with it. That's helpful.